Right, let's get started. Thanks everybody for joining us. I can see attendees are still starting to trickle in on the right over there. And thanks, of course, to our panelists, Lucilla, Ake, and Wilson, and to Nadia Whitamy, MP, for chairing tonight's event. I mean, if we put it bluntly, 2020 has been a bit of a rubbish year for everybody, pretty much everywhere. But where we found hope, where communities have been kept alive or afloat, where the lights have been kept on, and shops and hospitals and all the essential bits of life have been kept running. We've seen the hard work, not necessarily of government, not of big business, but of workers who have taken risks that many of us have been protected from, often because of policies that are in place to deny them rights and protections. So many workers throughout this pandemic who have done remarkable things have had, unfortunately, no choice, forced by sheer lack of other options, by the lack of recourse to public funds, by their immigration status, and by the hostile environment. They've been exposed to exploitation and conditions which many would find shocking. Our campaign, Work It Out, calls on government to ensure that this never happens again, to ensure that all workers, wherever they're from, are protected in the workplace and are able to lead safe and healthy lives outside work, regardless of their immigration status. We'll have comments from our amazing panelists for about 40 to 45 minutes tonight, and then we'll take questions at the end. 9 months in, I hope everybody is familiar with Zoom, but just in case, everybody is on mute, and the event is recorded, and you can watch it back later, and we'll provide those details on our mailing list and on our website. If you've got comments or questions, please put them in the chat box at the bottom over there. One of our panelists will be using an interpreter, and you should all have a button at the bottom of your screen that's a globe that will allow you to select English translation so that you can hear that while Wilson is speaking. And you'll be reminded at the right time to turn that on and off as appropriate. I'll hand over in a moment to our chair for the evening. Nadia Whitamy is the MP for Nottingham East. In her first year in Parliament, she's been an outspoken ally to migrant communities and workers across the UK, putting many of her colleagues to shame, or many of us to shame as well. Nadia scrubbed up at the start of the pandemic and worked as a carer in a care home where she blew the whistle on PPE shortages. I can't think of anyone better to be chairing our event this evening, and I'll hand over to Nadia now. Thanks so much, Nadia.
That's an extremely kind introduction, Satbir. Thank you so much. And thank you to the JCWI for inviting me to speak at the launch of this hugely important campaign. On the left and in pro-migrant sections of the labour movement, we often say that it's not migrants who lower wages, it's bosses. And that is an extremely important point that needs to be made over and over again until we win that argument. But what many people don't realise is what enables exploitation and helps bosses drive down wages and exploitation is anti-migrant policies like no recourse to public funds and like the illegal working offence. These things make workers much more precarious, less able to defend themselves, less able to report abuse and unionise and fight back. So as a result, these anti-migrant policies don't just harm migrant workers, as if that isn't bad enough, but they harm all workers because they put downward pressure on everybody's wages and conditions at work. And that's what the Work It Out campaign is talking about. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers who will be able to tell you so much more from their lived experience and very impressive background of organising on this. First of all, I'm going to introduce Lucilla Granada, who's the CEO of Focus on Labour Exploitation, or FLEX. This is a group campaigning against exploitation, trafficking and modern slavery. And Lucilla is also formerly the director of the Latin Americans Women's Rights Service. Thank you, Lucilla.
Thank you, Nadia. And thanks to JCWI's team for putting together this event and for inviting me to speak. For those of you who don't know us, FLEX, or Focus on Labor Exploitation, we are a research and policy organization dedicated to prevent labor abuse, protect the rights of those affected by or at risk of exploitation, and promote best practice responses to this issue. Our approach focuses on understanding and seeking to transform the systems and the structures that make workers vulnerable to exploitation. And so this includes looking at government policy and particularly how immigration policy increases risk of labor exploitation. So today I'll speak about the illegal working offense and why it is problematic when it comes to creating vulnerability for undocumented workers. But first, I wanted to also talk about something that Nadia already mentioned, and is that the illegal working offense not only affects undocumented migrants, but also migrant workers with a range of legal statuses. So to kind of approach this, it's important to make a point that might be rather obvious to many of you, and is the fact that the immigration system is a very complex system that distributes sets of rights to different groups of people, which means that some groups have more power than others in shaping their own circumstances and in engaging with others. So it is a system that essentially distributes power. And this system is, of course, not neutral. It may be more or less informed by the economy, but it results from political decisions. And so this distribution of power is done by restricting some groups from accessing certain rights, entitlements, and protections. So for instance, if my visa allows me to change employers, then I have more alternatives than those who aren't allowed to change employers. Some people under some visas may be able to change employers, but are not able to change sectors. So they're trapped in sectors that are high risk, like domestic work or agriculture, for example. But still, they will have more power than those who are not allowed to work at all. So these differences that the system creates between migrants have been described as a hierarchy of vulnerability, which I think it's a useful concept to think about or to keep in mind when we think about the illegal working offense. Of course, in the UK, having the hostile environment policy, irregular migrants have by far the fewest rights and protections, and are therefore most vulnerable to the most vulnerable category of migrants, the people that are put at higher risk. But the illegal working offense, therefore, also affects other migrants with restricted visas. Now, the links between irregularity and labor exploitation have been extensively researched and are widely accepted in the anti-trafficking world. There is significant evidence that shows how insecure immigration status is being used in the UK to coerce migrants into putting up with abusive working conditions. Many times employers target or recruit undocumented workers on purpose because they know of their leverage with them. And this is also not a hidden truth for governments either. So in fact, this particular form of control linked to irregularity is recognized in the anti-trafficking framework by the UNODC as one of the forms of abuse of a position of vulnerability. So one of the possible means that traffickers can use to exploit people. A study also from the European Agency of Fundamental Rights found that resident status was the most important risk factor leading to labor exploitation among migrant workers. And this is from a study in 2019, which looked at the situation of, I believe, 6 different countries in the EU, including the UK at that point. And at least the last time that I worked with the NRM risk assessment tool, being threatened with deportation was also recognized by the Home Office as an indicator of modern slavery. So the illegal working offense clearly conflicts with any efforts that are aimed at preventing exploitation or modern slavery. And we know that fear of detention and removal is one of the primary barriers to reporting issues at work for migrant workers. For those in exploitation or modern slavery, this poses the threat, the illegal working offense poses the threat of being sent back to the very starting point where they were vulnerable to trafficking in the first place, many times with higher debts or being separated from their families. For those who are at risk of exploitation or working in high-risk sectors, this inability to trust the agencies that are there to support vulnerable people forces them to accept abusive conditions. And this is something that the Labor Exploitation Advisory Group has identified and evidenced on a couple of reports, which I can share on the chat later. And these fears are sadly not unfounded. We know, for instance, that in 2019, more than 1,000 potential victims of trafficking were detained either before or after being referred into the NRM, so recognized as a potential victim of trafficking. And this comes from an FOI done by an organization called After Exploitation. But there's also another FRA study from 2017 that found that having insecure immigration status was also one of the main barriers that discouraged migrants to report abuse at work. So in sum, it is clear that the illegal working offense, and again, that is the political decision to criminalize undocumented laborers and remove safeguards from a specific group of people, first increases vulnerability for workers with irregular status, as they know that coming forward might lead them to bigger harm. Second, it increases vulnerability for a range of migrant workers with regular status, but who know that reporting might put their jobs at risk, affect their visas, and therefore risk becoming undocumented. And thirdly, it affects everyone in high-risk sectors and society as a whole, as it gives exploiters and employers a significant amount of power and the aid of the system. This is also a growing concern in the context of Brexit, as we fear that there might be a significant growth in irregular migration. We know that not everyone will make the deadline for the EU settlement scheme, and the Migration Observatory estimated that even if only 1% of the people eligible for the scheme are not able to make the deadline, that means that 30,000 people become undocumented, and this is really a low estimate in terms of how many people might not be able to make the deadline. There is also no route for migrant workers to fill in jobs in sectors like construction or cleaning, where we know that there's going to be an ongoing demand, and we know that jobs are a very powerful factor pulling migrants into irregularity. And of course, the very limited routes available, like the seasonal worker scheme for agriculture, have a number of restrictions attached that create further risk for workers. And we're already seeing the impact on risk of becoming undocumented. So there are good reasons to brace ourselves for an increase in irregular migration, which will be a big challenge for NGOs, for trade unions, and for local authorities in the coming period. So what can be done? Of course, support JCWI's campaign to challenge the illegal working offense. Support also the call for secure reporting mechanisms. And we're working with labor market enforcement agencies and with other relevant stakeholders, including by trying to inform the development of the single enforcement body on this. And so, yeah, support the call for secure reporting, which by this, we mean ensuring that workers can report safely, can report abuse safely, and ensuring that their data is not going to be used for immigration enforcement. But also that enforcement of workers' rights is not done simultaneously with immigration enforcement inspections. Of course, there's also needs to be improved enforcement of workers' rights in high-risk sectors, and proper monitoring of the risk associated with the very limited available routes. This is to inform the future of the temporary schemes that are available, like the seasonal worker pilot, but also help mitigate risk in potentially, future schemes that can be open. And finally, I think we can all push to ensure that workers, trade unions, and other organizations representing workers and representing migrants help define the problem and identify also the solutions that will work for them. Yeah, so that's my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucila, and you've just absolutely nailed all the reasons why migrants' rights and workers' rights go hand in hand, particularly on why it's so problematic for someone's workers' rights to be linked to their visa and therefore to their employer. So thank you for that. Next, we have Ake Achi. Ake is the founder and director of Migrants at Work, and he himself is a former child labourer who's also worked as a trade union organiser. Over to you, Ake.
All right, thank you, Nadia. Thank you, everyone. So as Nadia said, my name is Aki. I have a work for the trade union, and I am a former child laborer. So exploitation is part of me, I would say. But what I'm going to be talking about tonight is how immigration law affect us migrant on the ground. So whether you have the legal right to work on that, immigration law affect us. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is when you have the legal right to work, but you cannot work or you've been suspended without pay or dismissed lawfully simply because your employer did not understand immigration law. So I'm just going to show you the journey of a migrant in the UK. When you are non-migrant or you don't have any immigration issue, it's quite simple. You get a job, you apply for the job, you get to work, and that's it. But for a migrant worker, it's more complex than that. Just gonna share my screen. Okay. So that's how the landscape is for us migrant at work. So the first obstacle when you come to this country or before you come to this country is to get the entry clearance before you get into the country. So once you get in the country, you have applied for your leave to come to this country. If you get your leave, then the government issue you with your national insurance number. So it's easy. You get to the country, you have the right to work right away. You have your national insurance number, you can work. When you apply to work from within the UK, if you're a migrant who arrive in the UK, for example, and you have never worked, you don't have a national insurance number, what usually the Home Office does is your national insurance number is on your biometric resident permit. And because on the employer's guide to right to work check, it says that the migrant needs to produce not only the ID, but also a valid, a permanent national insurance number. So if you have a biometric resident card, you're gonna have your national insurance number on it. But when you do not have your national insurance number on your biometric resident permit, that's where it becomes a little bit difficult because employer believes that the fact that you don't have a national insurance number, you are illegal in the country. Therefore, you cannot work. So you need to go through the right to work check and then get your national insurance number. Then that's where your entry to the labor market is clear. Then you can access your work. So you can really see from the very beginning, you have two big obstacles for us migrants. Now, when you get into the workplace, then it becomes even more complex because you have settled workers, you have precarious workers and unsettled workers. So all these definitions, we have to take a different approach because the way we describe precarious workers and the way immigration law describe precarious worker or settled workers or unsettled workers is completely different. If we want to protect migrant workers' right, we need to get the terms right. Because as of now, a lot of people are using undocumented migrant workers, so those who are in a country who do not have the legal right to work. These for us, these are irregular migrant workers because undocumented migrant workers will be those who have the legal right to work, but do not have the right document or the acceptable document as a Home Office code to be able to work. So I think we need to changed the term to be able to protect migrant workers at work. So once, if you get into this section here where you have when you are a settled worker, so you are either a British citizen or you have indefinite leave to remain in the country, then that's fine. You shouldn't have any problem at work at all. You should get to work, have all your right anyone is entitled to. Now, within these groups, so you have those who have the right of a vote. So you have British national, for example, so non-British national, British citizen, for example, who don't have any issue with their right to work because they don't have any problem. Then you have EU citizen who also don't have any problem. Now, when you get into the EU citizen, it become a little bit problematic because any employer believe that if you have a settled status and a pre-settled status, the pre-settled status does not give you full employment right. And that's what we see on the ground. Employer keeps saying, we need a full, permanent settled status. We don't need a pre-settled status. So that is a problem. So you have family member of an EU citizen. So I'm not going to be going through everything, but as you can see, it's quite complex. We cannot protect migrant worker while just campaigning on issues around migrant worker. We need to look into deeper, and of course, removing the right to work restriction would be ideal, but as of now, it's not being removed. So it's really important to look into detail about the statutory right of migrant workers before we can understand what right is applied to each category of migrant worker and how we should challenge that when migrant workers are being abused. So once you go through all this and you understand the legal status of a migrant, that's where you go to the next step, where immigration law divide migrant worker. As it stands, all workers, if you don't have any immigration issue, so we call it, instead of employment relationship, we rename it as settled employment relationship. When the immigration factor is involved, then migrants are divided in 3 different groups. Settled workers, as I said earlier, would be the British citizen, for example, or the British subject, for example, the windrush, for example, who don't have any restriction, but still in practice going to be having serious issues. The precarious workers going to be all those workers who are in a country lawfully, but do not have an indefinite leave to remain. These groups have some serious issues because when the leave to remain expired and they have renewed before it expires, so there was a provision under the Section 3C of the Immigration Act 1971 that protect their right. The only problem is that when you apply to renew your visa, the Home Office does no longer issue the acknowledgement letter. So the only thing you have is an email. The problem is that this email is not part of the accepted document. Therefore, your employer does not recognize this email, and they believe that you don't have the legal right to work because your document is expired. The fact that your document is expired, your leave does not expire. So you still have the legal right to work, provided that you have the right to work before your leave expires. But employers do not understand that. In the category of unsettled workers, so you have, again, 3 different groups here. You have those who are disqualified. You will see largely it's going to be those who are in detention centers, asylum seekers in detention centers. You have those who are subject to the 12-month ban, who are submitted the application but cannot work. So after the 12 months, then they can apply for permission to work. Then they can do that. So once they have done that, they have the legal right to work. Again, employers do not want to employ them because they are asylum seekers, and employer believe that they don't have the legal right to work, not knowing that if the ban has been lifted after the 12 months, therefore you should enjoy your full employment right like any other employer. And the next stage, once you've been through all the immigration journey and everything is fine, you have your legal right to work and you get into the workplace, it's how now you protect your right at work. When there is no immigration factor involved, if you're an employee or a worker, that's fine. Your legal link is established between you and your employer. If your employer breaches your right, you can take your employer to court. Union can help you, from your workplace. It goes all the way to court. There's no problem. But where the immigration factor is involved, that's why you see no union at all. Union are not helping migrant workers who have an issue with immigration status. A migrant worker who has an issue with his immigration status, when he get in touch with the union are doing nothing at all. Workplace organizers on the ground have no knowledge on regarding the right to work, have no experience. So when these migrants reach out to the union send them, well, basically ask them to contact an immigration lawyer. But when you're being suspended because of your right to work, and the union, when you pay your full membership to a union and they cannot support you because of your immigration status, so you're a victim of discrimination within the trade union. So trade union themselves, they are discriminating against migrant worker in practice, even though all the policies are beautiful and everything, but in practice, union are discriminating against migrant worker when the immigration factor is involved. So once you've gone through that stage, that's going to be the last slide, and you get to court. Employment tribunal, the way they look at the right of migrant worker is really shocking, because employment tribunal, as I put this case here, they do not determine your immigration status simply because they don't care, simply because it is not part of their jurisdiction. As he says here, that's one thing one of the judges said, the employment tribunal is not fit to handle such cases. So if you're being dismissed wrongly because of your immigration status, you take your employer to court. The judge is saying, the tribunal is saying that, well, this is an immigration matter, we cannot deal with the issue. Nevertheless, they will still assume jurisdiction and try to rule on this case by dismissing your immigration status. So how can you get a fair outcome when you have the legal right to work, but the judge is saying, well, that's not my problem. My problem is only employment right. So the system, the employment tribunal system is not fit for purpose, because we're going to have this kind of issue and not defend themselves properly in court. And in another case where the Section 3C leave apply, sometimes it can take months, 1 to 3 months for an individual to get his application assessed by the Home Office. So if your application takes 2 to 3 months, your employer will believe, as in this case, because it's taking so long, therefore we assume that you don't have the legal right to work. But employer do not understand the basic of immigration law. If your Section 3C leave applies, it does not matter how long it takes the Home Office to assess your application. As long as your Section 3C leave apply, you should be able to work. But employer don't understand that. Therefore, they will sack you because it took the Home Office too long to come back to you. So employer will give a lot of opportunities to provide evidence of your right to work, but it's not in your hand. If the Home Office does not provide any response to your request, there's nothing you can do. But the employer will insist that you provide evidence. So the Home Office has created a situation here where the burden of proof is on a migrant worker, when in the law, it's on employer to provide evidence in case there is an immigration right for them to establish a statutory defense. But migrants have been put in the middle between the Home Office and employer, and migrants are the one losing. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I was saying that's it for me.
Okay, thank you so much, Ake. That was just really helpful for people to see, I think, that detailed breakdown of the journey that that migrant workers make, and also the tribunal process as well. So thank you for that very valuable input. Next, we're going to hear from Wilson Ayala, and Wilson's contribution is going to be translated by Laura Barroso of the IWGB. Wilson is the chair of the Cleaners and Facilities branch of the IWGB. That's the Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain. which I'm sure you've all heard about because they've led some really legendary wins, particularly, well, I'll let Wilson tell you all about it. Over to you, Wilson.
Hola, 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 gracias por la invitación. Soy Wilson Ayala. Hola, ¿escuchan? Hola, hola. Hola, sí, buenas tardes. Soy Wilson Ayala, ecuatoriano. Era maestro de nivel secundario en Ecuador y actualmente soy el presidente de la rama de los cleaners del sindicato IWGB. Soy uno de los miles de emigrantes que salieron de su país para hacer realidad sueños y proyectos personales y familiares. Llegué a Madrid, en España, en el 2000. Hablar el mismo idioma me facilitó la búsqueda de empleo. Trabajé por 10 años como cajero en una conocida cadena de tiendas y restaurantes y a la vez como vendedor de seguros. Mi integración a este nuevo estilo de vida fue rápido. Gracias al sistema laboral y de empleo, logré un contrato estable y fijo, lo que me hizo y me ayudó a cumplir poco a poco las metas trazadas. La crisis económica vivida en España en el año 2010 hizo que me quedara sin empleo. Las responsabilidades familiares me obligaron a tomar un nuevo rumbo en busca de trabajo. Llegué a Londres el 23 de junio del 2012, justo el día de la inauguración de los Juegos Olímpicos. Un momento ideal para buscar empleo. Encontré trabajo de limpiador. Llegué a trabajar hasta 14 horas continuas. Fueron largas y agotadoras jornadas, pero yo feliz porque podía ayudar a mi familia que se quedó en Madrid. Mis jornadas diarias comenzaban a las 4 de la mañana hasta las 6 o 7 de la noche. No sé cómo pude aguantar. Además de estas largas horas, también tenía que estar siempre pendiente del pago, ya que había meses que no me pagaban y tenía que esperar al siguiente mes para cobrar. Llegué a estar los 2 primeros meses sin cobrar. Y el tercer mes, cuando lo pude por fin cobrar, solo recibí el 20% de mis horas trabajadas durante esos meses. Durante estos 2 meses se acabó mis ahorros que había traído para poder subsistir aquí en Londres. Pregunté a mis compañeros y me di cuenta que el problema era de todos, pero por miedo a que los despidan, no se atrevían a reclamar. Ante los abusos, la retención ilegal de salarios, explotación, malos tratos y despidos que veía a diario, me decidí a hacer algo y luchar también. Tuve la suerte de conocer a una compañera mayor, pero con mucha fuerza y ganas para luchar. Ella ya pertenecía a una de las ramas de la Universidad de Londres del sindicato. No habíamos muchos en aquel momento, pero no me importaba. Yo ya no me sentía solo. Por primera vez sentí que podía cambiar las cosas. Sentía que no estaba solo y que tenía a otras personas a mi lado. IWGB, nuestro sindicato, es un sindicato liderado por trabajadores y representa a trabajadores migrantes y precarios de varios sectores. Ahora mismo tenemos 11 ramas, desde limpiadores, guardias de seguridad, repartidores, conductores de taxi, programadores de videojuegos, trabajadores de ONGs y otras ramas. Mi rama de los cleaners y otros servicios, a la cual represento como presidente, tiene ahora mismo 1,200 miembros, la mayoría de los cuales somos trabajadores migrantes, mayoritariamente de Latinoamérica. Nuestro objetivo en el sindicato es empoderar a los miembros y enseñarles que tienen derechos y que se pueden unificar para luchar juntos y mejorar los términos y condiciones y también luchar contra las injusticias del idioma, que ha sido una barrera para nosotros. En general, los inmigrantes estamos doblemente explotados y tenemos miedo a alzar la voz. El sindicato y la rama está trabajando para asegurarnos que los trabajadores migrantes desarrollen la confianza para alzarse, organizarse y luchar. Los miembros de mi rama han sido uno de los más afectados durante esta pandemia del COVID-19. El primer problema que tuvimos fue la incertidumbre de las primeras semanas antes de que se anunciara el confinamiento. La inhabilidad del gobierno de informar correctamente sobre las medidas dejó a muchos de nuestros miembros confundidos y sin saber qué hacer. Los primeros días recibimos una avalancha de llamadas pidiendo ayuda. El cierre de muchos edificios y el hecho de que el gobierno no hizo el furlough obligatorio desembocó en que muchas empresas intentaron llevar a cabo despidos masivos. No pagaron los sueldos e intentaron reducir las horas de trabajo. Hemos visto casos desoladores de empresas intentando despedir a madres solteras en baja por maternidad o a punto de irse de baja por maternidad, por ejemplo. Durante la pandemia, estas empresas también no han implementado medidas de salud y seguridad. No han proporcionado los materiales necesarios para realizar los trabajos. No han establecido distancias de seguridad ni han dado ningún training a sus empleados. Hemos visto casos en los que las empresas han forzado a venir a trabajar a cleaners de más de 60 años, con problemas de salud muy graves, como el asma y otras enfermedades de riesgo. También hemos visto empresas denegando vacaciones a los trabajadores, con la excusa de que como habían estado en furlough, no habían acumulado vacaciones. Nuestro sindicato IWGB, sin embargo, ha luchado contra todos estos abusos durante la pandemia. Hemos conseguido poner a cientos de trabajadores en el furlough y así paralizar los despidos o reducciones de horas. Para que tengan una idea, desde que la pandemia comenzó, hemos ayudado a más de 1,000 casos de nuestros trabajadores con problemas. Hemos tenido reuniones y trainings en Zoom cada 2 semanas para mantener a nuestros miembros actualizados sobre la situación y responder a cualquier medidas de salud y seguridad en los sitios de trabajo. Recientemente hemos obtenido una gran victoria en los tribunales, mediante la cual hemos extendido los derechos de salud y seguridad para algunos trabajadores precarios, para que así se sientan seguros y no tengan que ir a trabajar y no sufran detrimento y tengan mejor acceso a los equipos de protección y garantías para sus trabajos. Para IWGB, las campañas siempre son una importante herramienta de lucha que saca a relucir la importancia de la unidad y la fuerza de los trabajadores. Mediante huelgas, protestas, hemos demostrado las condiciones tan precarias en las que trabajamos y la explotación en nuestros trabajos. Ahora mismo tenemos una campaña contra una empresa de limpieza multimillonaria que se niega a poner el furlough a los trabajadores. Y estamos pidiendo a los simpatizantes que escriban a la empresa y al cliente para denunciar esta situación. También tenemos otra campaña in-house para los guardas de seguridad en la Universidad de Greenwich, que en enero irán a la huelga si no les ponen in-house. Los links de las 2 campañas se los pondremos pronto para que nos respalden y podemos lograr esta victoria. Los migrantes somos algunos de los miembros de la sociedad más explotados e infrarrepresentados. Y lo que vemos en el día a día es que el sistema nos está fallando. IWGB representa a migrantes que se están organizando en sus sitios de trabajo, en industrias increíblemente precarias. No es ninguna sorpresa que estas industrias precarias tengan trabajadores que son mayoritariamente migrantes, tanto si eres un migrante trabajando de cleaner, repartidor, guardia de seguridad o conductor de taxi. Estas industrias utilizan modelos de empleo que quitan derecho a los trabajadores y que reducen el coste laboral. IWGB está luchando y ganando contra estos ataques sistémicos y estructurales a los inmigrantes. La pandemia ha demostrado que los trabajadores migrantes, a los que antes se les consideraba no cualificados y no bienvenidos, somos profundamente esenciales. Y ahora más que nunca es el momento de organizarse, sindicalizarse, luchar y ganar las condiciones y el pago que nos merecemos. Hasta la victoria siempre. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Wilson, and Solidarity. Thank you for the incredible work that you're doing, organising. This is genuinely groundbreaking. It's the kind of organising that is, it's new. It's like the first of its kind in this country, and it's really making a change in workplaces and people's lives. And it shows the power that that migrant workers have. So thank you so much. And I believe that that the JCWI have put those petitions that Wilson mentioned in the chat box. So there's the justice for Greenwich workers to end outsourcing at the university, and there's also a link there where you can donate to the strike fund. And I really would encourage people to do that if you're able to. We're going to move to questions now. And I think what I'll do is take these questions in batches of 3 and then go to each of our panelists. And I'll try to get through as many questions as we can. Okay, so bear with me, just scrolling up the chat box. There are loads of comments in here about, can we make the slides larger? Those aren't the questions that are relevant now. Okay, here we go. A question from Dora Polenta. Factoring in that the current economic and healthcare systems marginalise migrants in several unique ways, should we start a campaign for the needs of migrants to be borne in mind and prioritised during the vaccine rollout programmes, given, for example, that migrants are often forced to live in places where social distancing and other precautions aren't possible, and also highlighting those with intersectional or intersecting marginalised identities who have been disproportionately affected. Let's start with that question while I scroll through the chat and find other questions. Who'd like to take that first?
I would say on base that we should organize migrant not as migrant workers, but as workers. Yeah. Because when we organize migrant workers as migrant, we move away from employment right. And that is wrong. And this is a way that the labor movement have been trying to protect us, and it does not work. If somebody at work come to you because they've been victim of discrimination or the disability, for example, you're not going to campaign for, if that person is white, you're not going to campaign for a white person disabled. You're just going to campaign, on discrimination issue. So we should tackle the issue, not the individual themselves. So we really need a different approach to migrant workers' rights.
I think that's absolutely right. Okay, thank you. Wilson, do you have, I'm sure that you've got a lot to add to this.
I will translate the question for Wilson, if that's okay.
Sure.
Wilson, una pregunta es, debido a que los sistemas de salud y económicos suelen marginalizar a los migrantes en muchas maneras, ¿tú crees que deberíamos empezar una campaña para las necesidades de los migrantes, para que se les priorice, por ejemplo, durante el sistema de vacunas que se va a poner en marcha ahora?
Sí, yo creo que es muy importante que nuestros hechos y seguridad es universal y es muy contradictorio de que durante la pandemia se haya considerado al sector de la limpieza como personas indispensables para poder ayudar durante esta pandemia. Pues eso ha sido solo de palabra, pero en hechos no hemos conseguido nada. Seguimos siendo trabajadores precarios, trabajadores sin condiciones de salud y seguridad, y creo que es importante de que todas las organizaciones, todos los trabajadores, todos los sindicatos nos unamos para exigir que se cumpla este derecho universal de salud y seguridad que tenemos todos los trabajadores.
Yeah, the health system and health and safety really is a universal right. As cleaners, most of the migrant workers, as we've seen, who have been essential during the pandemic to help the wider population, have not had any protections in relation to health and safety. And we're still under very precarious conditions. So I do believe that organisations, trade unions, we should unite and ask for very health and safety protections to be applied to migrant workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lara. Just checking with tech support, is it possible for us to put the interpretation button on, or is that not possible during the Q&A? If so, that would be good. If not, then I'll leave extra space for Laura to interpret. Lucilla, do you have anything to add?
Well, on the rollout of the vaccine, I guess the one thing that is increasingly worrying is the lack of information really about how this will go, and whether, and especially considering the group of migrants that we're focusing on today, irregular migrants, and whether they will have access to the vaccine, and whether that access will be safe, whether it's going to be part of what GPs are distributing and primary care, and whether irregular migrants will be able to trust the system to access the vaccine, which obviously is represented another public health issue for everyone. And I completely echo the comments around this kind of inconsistency between recognizing the how essential workers at the front line have been during the pandemic, while at the same time, you know, it's a big question mark as to whether everyone will be able to access the vaccine.
Thank you, Lucilla. And we've got another question for you as a follow-up from that, but actually I'm sure that others will have an answer for this as well. How can we make it possible for migrant workers to report exploitation without risking deportation? And I think at least part of everyone's answer to this will be strengthening the union movement and the laws that follow that. But over to you.
Yes, well, the first thing actually that would be repealing the illegal working offense. It shouldn't be, you know, the fact that it's been proven many times that labor abuses are linked to more serious levels of abuse and to some crimes at work makes it really important for us for it to be recognized that there shouldn't be a risk in coming forward, a risk in whistleblowing and in reporting abuse. Any worker reports abuse and then it's penalized, that is called victimization. So if undocumented or irregular workers are not able to come forward and report abuse because of the risk of rotation, that is really a problem for everyone. But repealing the illegal working offense would be the most, one of, you know, the first thing that comes to mind, but then also there are other measures that could be implemented at the kind of infrastructural level by the organizations that are there to workers' reports and to enforce workers' rights, such as the ones that I've mentioned. So ensuring that the data that they have access to as a result of that reporting process is not used for a completely different type of enforcement, which is immigration enforcement, and so that data is not accessible to immigration enforcement teams, but also that operations that are targeting exploitative employers and that are checks on workers' conditions are not done simultaneously, so jointly with immigration enforcement inspections, which are essentially really enforcing against workers rather than employers, and so obviously make workers feel unease about any kind of contact with inspectors. So ensuring no data sharing with immigration enforcement, and then also stopping simultaneous employment, but of course at the legislative level, repealing the illegal working offence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that has to be the first step. Just a different view has been expressed on this in the chat, and then I'll put both questions back to everyone, including Ake and Wilson. Vicky's asking whether, rather than campaigning for the rights of undocumented workers, would it be better to put our efforts into trying to reduce the barriers to migrants becoming documented, for example, campaigning against the prohibitively high visa fees and making the application process simpler. What's your take on this? Okay, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think from our point of view, whatever system that we change in this country will not change how employer treat migrant on the ground. Because as I said in my presentation, individuals who have the legal right to work are still victim of abuses on the ground. So this we of course have to change the law, but we also need to educate migrant workers. And that's what we've been doing for the past 12 months. And we're gonna keep doing that by educating frontline migrant support organization, but also employers and union if they wanna get in touch with us. It's really important for migrants to educate themselves, because if you don't educate migrant or any other person, you're not gonna be able to identify the sign of labor exploitation. Whatever measures you put in place to help the victim, or if you change the law so that these potential victims do not fall into the gap, it won't change anything, because if they don't know what the law is and how to enforce the right, then nothing's going to change. But this also means that those who are supposed to enforce migrant workers who are on the ground, union, need to be educated, because there is a lack of understanding of the issue migrants are facing and immigration law. Because going forward, our main concern as migrants in this country is going to be immigration law. So union needs to stop selling car insurance for us to join union. They need to focus on what really, really matters to us migrant workers, which is immigration law.
Yeah, I'm nodding in agreement. I completely agree with all of that. Wilson, I'm sure that you've got a lot to add to this question and the previous question as well, about what we can do to allow and empower workers to be able to stand up to their bosses without risking deportation. And why is it that we're demanding the end of this law that makes it illegal for many migrants to work the illegal working offence, rather than campaigning to reduce barriers to migrants becoming documented?
Wilson, la pregunta es ¿cómo es posible o qué podemos hacer para que los migrantes indocumentados puedan reportar los abusos, las explotaciones sin miedo a que les deporten. Si la solución es que se abola la ley que les hace ser indocumentados y por lo tanto les deporte, o si por ejemplo es reducir las barreras que tienen para ser documentados, ¿no? Lo que tienen que pagar para poder acceder a una visa. ¿Qué es lo que tú crees que se debería hacer?
Sí, yo creo que este tema es muy complicado y muy difícil, en el cual tenemos que estar involucrados todas las organizaciones sociales, los sindicatos, los estudiantes y también los consulados, porque ellos están para defender los derechos de sus miembros. Entonces, pues yo creo que es muy importante de que se cambie las leyes, luchar. Creo que con unidad podemos trabajar para poder ir poco a poco cambiando las leyes y dar la oportunidad a estas personas que salen de su país en busca de trabajo y que se dé también, que se ayude a ejercer el derecho al cual tenemos todos los seres humanos, derecho al trabajo, derecho a la vida, derecho a un porvenir bueno para sus familias. Entonces yo creo que tenemos que demostrar en las calles esa unidad, esa fuerza para poder ir cambiando y que también pues se sientan protegidos y respaldados por sus respectivos consulados y embajadas. Creo que eso es una labor en conjunto que tenemos que hacer todos, organizaciones sociales, sindicatos y todos, para poder que estas personas que están indocumentadas tengan también derecho al trabajo, a la salud y a un empleo digno.
It is a complicated matter that requires many agents to be involved. So obviously unions, social organizations, the state. It is clear that we need to change this law that makes these migrants undocumented. And you know, we need to give the opportunity to those people who flee in the countries and live in the countries, wanting to find a job, wanting to find a better life, to have the right to life, to a better life, to work. And we need to demonstrate this by, you know, taking the streets, being all united and working together to support these migrants.
Here. One of the things that is, just to say that I think that sets out really well why these things aren't mutually exclusive. We can campaign on both of those things at once, and we can be ambitious whilst also doing practical things to mitigate the worst impacts of that hostile immigration policy in the here and now. One of the things that is coming up a lot in the chat, which I have a lot of sympathy with, is the need for unions and the trade union movement as a whole to be prioritising these issues. What does the panel think about that? What can people watching this do within their own unions? For those who are in unions who perhaps haven't taken a strong stand on these issues, what lessons can be learned from unions like the IWGB and UVW, and what can people do in their own branches? Do you want to translate that first, Laura?
Yes, of course. Wilson, una pregunta que está saliendo mucho es ¿qué pueden hacer la gente que nos está escuchando en sus sindicatos, en esos sindicatos también más grandes que no se han posicionado acerca de los derechos de los migrantes o que les están dejando al lado? ¿Qué se les puede decir a esos sindicatos o qué lecciones se pueden aprender del sindicato como de IWGB o de Voces Unidas en cuanto al apoyo que se le ofreció a los migrantes?
Sí, yo creo que nuestro sindicato ha crecido, ahora mismo somos casi 6,000 miembros, es por la falta de apoyo de estos sindicatos grandes que tienen una lucha desigual, porque nosotros como sindicato pequeño que acoge a trabajadores migrantes, a trabajadores precarios, a trabajadores explotados, estamos luchando y trabajando para llegar a la mitad de salarios o a la mitad de condiciones que tienen ellos. Ellos están a otro nivel de lucha. Nuestros sindicatos, como el nuestro, está tratando de conseguir algo que ellos ya tienen y que no les interesa luchar por los trabajadores precarios. Entonces yo pienso de que tenemos que hacer un llamado a estos sindicatos grandes, de que hacerles conocer de que existimos los trabajadores migrantes, los trabajadores precarios, y que tienen que también unirse y ayudarnos a cambiar este sistema laboral de explotación, este sistema donde tenemos pocos derechos los trabajadores, tenemos derecho, que estos sindicatos grandes están luchando para mejorar sus condiciones que por sí ya son buenas, y que se olvidan del trabajador migrante, que se olvidan del trabajador explotado.
In the IWGB, we've got over 5,000 members, and I think one of the reasons is because the big unions often have forgotten about us migrant workers and precarious workers, and sometimes it does feel like they have a different fight, because our unions are trying to achieve better conditions for the precarious workers and migrant workers. We're trying to get to a point where we get half of the rights that some of the members in the big unions have. And sometimes it does feel like bigger unions are not so interested in helping migrant workers, because that's the conditions that we're fighting for, they're already achieved in most of the sectors. So we need to tell them that we exist, that we're here, and that they need to help us, because together we can fight against this exploitative system where we have little to no rights. So we do ask them to come together, for us to come together and fight for better conditions.
Thank you, Wilson and Laura. Lucilla, do you have anything to add to this?
Yes, I wanted to sort of mention, I mean, that I think we do need to recognize the challenge, obviously, of organizing undocumented workers in this context, where a lot of times people will be very afraid to share, to be exposed to declare their immigration situation, considering how tough the current policies are. So many times we need to remember that undocumented workers and undocumented people in general, they have very small social circles and will not share this element of their circumstances with broader networks necessarily. There are also some challenges in general that I believe mainstream unions face in relation to this, some of the labor sectors that are so fragmented, like cleaning, for instance, and outsourced sectors, service sectors in general. And there are some other challenges that have to do with the design of the visas as well, in the way that workers are being limited in their time in the UK, for instance, which means that workers will not have necessarily big incentives to learn the system or join a union. So it's very difficult for a worker that is now working in one of these very fragmented sectors, where you may be working for 2 hours for one employer, another 2 hours with a different employer, to pay a monthly membership to a union. So I think from IWGB or UWW, mainstream unions can learn the lesson of new or different forms of organizing to ensure that unions are accessible and respond to the issues that migrant workers are facing. Obviously, for undocumented workers in particular, apart from the fact of the reluctance to be exposed, just unions are usually paid by monthly fees that are deducted from your bank account. If you're undocumented, you have many barriers to access a bank account. So that's just a very practical barrier to access. That said, obviously, mainstream unions have a massive voice and a very important role in the democratic societies. So what I would say is that they can definitely do better in challenging this kind of, for instance, the illegal working offense and policies that are so harmful for so many people, and in representing and in championing the rights of all workers, way beyond the membership necessarily.
Thank you, Lucila. And Aki, do you have anything to add? And then I'm going to come to one very short final question for final remarks from the three of you.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is on union. The way union operate, because this issue of migrant being refused employment because of migration status has been going on since 1997. So for the past 23 years, the mainstream union have done nothing, zero, nada, nothing. But if union really want to protect migrant workers, they first need to really understand what the issues are. Just last week, I went to see a partner, and there was somebody from the union who came to speak to asylum seekers, encourage them to join the union so that they can protect their right. How can you protect the right of somebody who does not have the legal right to work? So union, because what union are doing, they're fighting for migrant workers' right. In order for each migrant worker or for those migrant workers to have right at work, they need to be able to work, to have the legal right to work. So if unions do not understand the statutory right to work, and they go out there to encourage asylum seekers to join the union so they can help them, asylum seekers do not have the right to work unless the 12-month ban is lifted. The union, by not understanding immigration law or issue around immigration law, not only they create, not only they are unhelpful, but they are contributing to labor exploitation by not being proactive and not taking care of the issue itself. The union need to educate themselves before they can be on the same platform, to try to help migrant workers.
That's absolutely right, okay, and it's an uncomfortable truth for the Labour Party and the mainstream of the Labour movement. It's something that, frankly, we just need to be much, much better on and have failed on for many years. And that's why I'm so proud to be able to work with unions like the IWGB, UVW, and emerging unions, as well as my own trade union as a Labour MP. I think Siche wanted to ask a question and had their hand raised. If not, then I'm going to wind up. I know that there are questions left in the chat, but we can't possibly get to all of those. And of course, this isn't going to be the last conversation that we have on this. We need to keep organising and keep meeting and discussing these issues and then acting. Minnie from the JCWY has just said that they will send everything out to people afterwards. So if you couldn't see anything well or you missed anything, don't worry, because you'll get all of that information. I'd like to finish then by thanking all of our panelists, Ake, Wilson and Lucila, to thank the JCWY for organising this event, and also to the IWGB, to Migrants at Work, and to Flex for supporting it too. I've submitted an early day motion on calling on the government to abolish the illegal work law. That's EDM 1263. So if, as one action from this, everybody could email their MPs and ask them to sign early day motion 1263. Other asks from the event: Migrants at Work are organising a Zoom session on the 18th of this month about how immigration law creates and exacerbates vulnerability to race discrimination and labour exploitation. So please have a look at their website for more details on that and join. And then also please sign the petition that Wilson mentioned in solidarity with University of Greenwich cleaners. And if you can, please donate to the IWGB Strike Fund. Solidarity, everyone, and thank you for joining, and I look forward to us organising together. Take care.